Hi folks, Darrel Smith from South Dakota again. Today I want to tell you a little story about an adventure that Glenda and I had at the Spur-of-the-Moment adventure. It's dated 1983. I don't remember that specifically, but that some of the literature I looked at, that date was in there. I was working for the airline and was this particular day was deadheading home. I was riding as a passenger on an airplane back to Minneapolis, and we lived in Northfield, Minnesota, which is about 30 miles south of the airport in Minneapolis. Well, I was just kind of daydreaming, not much on my mind, and I realized that I was coming up on a period starting the next day of 10 days free of duty. I was had 10 days off, and so I said, well, maybe we should take a trip somewhere, a driving trip. And I thought of northern Minnesota, which is always really nice. And we hadn't been over to Wisconsin, so I thought maybe that would be an idea. But somehow, and I don't know how it got into my mind, but somehow I came up with Alaska. And I'd often heard when I was younger of Alaska, but I never dreamed I would have a chance to see it. So I got home and chatted with Glenda and said, what do you think about driving that old Oldsmobile up to Alaska? Well, she's up for adventure most of the time, and this time she said, sure, let's try it. The old Oldsmobile had been in the family for several years, and had a lot of miles on it. And we bought it during the first fuel crisis that I can remember. And everybody was worried about what kind of engine and saving gas and that sort of thing. So this was a full-size Oldsmobile. It had a V8 engine, and at that moment, nobody wanted it. It just sat on the lot. And sat on the odd days and days. And so I looked it over. It's a good car. It looked good. Didn't have any miles on it. I offered them $1,500 for it. They took it. So we had used that car for years, probably put 100,000 miles or more on it. And I suggested to Glenda, let's drive it up there and sell it. It was getting a bit older. It had 150,000 miles or more on it. And so that was our goal. The air conditioner didn't work, wasn't working, so I ran it down to the shop and had them looked at it, and it was not savable, so I had them just cut the belt, and had to ride with no air conditioner. Well, to get to Alaska, you have to go on the Alcan Highway. And at the beginning of World War II, the Japanese invaded and occupied two of the islands out on the Aleutian Chain. And the Aleutian Chain runs out maybe 1,200 miles or more. And it's part of Alaska. So the Japanese actually landed and occupied a U.S. land, territory. Well, they eventually were. It's a whole other story for them, and I can't remember the sequence of events. I'll make it real short. The islands are Attu and Kiska. The Japanese occupied both of those. There was no resistance. There was no army out there, and so they just landed and took over. There were a few people, but not any kind of army. So I don't know how long they were there, but the U.S. finally attacked Attu, and it was a fierce battle. A lot of people were killed, and after that, they were going to invade Kiska, and the troops were young, and they had never seen combat before. It was foggy. It was real foggy, and they couldn't see. And these kids were scared. And one of the officers later on said they were shooting at anything that moved. Well, what they didn't know was that the Japanese had evacuated the island. There was no Japanese on the island. So They were moving across the island, and I believe it was 92 soldiers were killed. Friendly fire, all of it. There was no Japanese. So it was a sad day, but that's the story of that. But with that going on, that activity up in Alaska, the U.S. thought they needed some way to defend that part of our territory. So, in kind of a rush, they decided to create and build the Alcan Highway. It went from Dawson City, Port Dawson, Dawson Creek, from Dawson Creek, British Columbia, up to Delta Junction in up in Alaska, and it was a rough and tough build, but they were able to get it done, and of course the Japanese never tried to invade again anyway. But the road has stayed there, and they've improved it all along, and Glenda and I were going to give it a try. We did a little reading, and they said take extra gas can, take extra tires, the road's awful. Well, that wasn't true. A good portion of it was paved, and the part that was not paved was no loose gravel. They had it packed hard, and you could run, and it was smooth. You could run speed limit, no problem at all. So we took off on our spur-of-the-moment big adventure. Drove to Minot, North Dakota, with no air conditioning and a hot, windy day. It was not a very comfortable ride, but we made it, and each day as we got further north, the temperature went down, so it wasn't a real disadvantage to have no air conditioning. Well, we got to Minot, and they have legal gambling up there, right there in the hotel we were in. And we had been to Vegas a few times, and Glenda had played some blackjack, and she had had some luck with it. She won a few bucks here and there. So she took a $20 bill and said she was going to try to win enough money to pay for our trip to Alaska. Didn't work. Lost it all within a minute or two. And it was kind of wrecked our plans of the financing the trip. Anyway, we went from there to across Canada. Calgary was the next stop. Calgary, as we were approaching there, it was interesting. It's a territory we'd never seen before. A lot of farmland, but it was also oil fields. And so that was a different look. After we left Calgary, we went almost straight west to the Rocky Mountains, and we went through Banff, Camray, that's not the name, Kamloops, I can't think of the name right now, but through those parks over there, it was just absolutely beautiful, as beautiful as anywhere. Continued north through until we reached the beginning of the trail, and then we went headed north from there. It was kind of a challenge. We didn't take any extra gas, but it was kind of a challenge to ration our gas, in that we would sometimes, even though we had half a tank or more, we would top it off because we weren't sure exactly where the next gas station was. We got a milepost magazine, our book, and it was a great help and great fun in that Glenda, this book gives a mile by mile narrative on what you expect to see, and every creek and every pond and every little town and every monument. So Glenda would keep up with that in the milepost magazine, and it was good in that we learned more that way. We had several little adventures. One night we were in a bar because it was the only place to eat, and we were getting a sandwich or something, and probably a beer and a glass of wine. But at the next table, there was a young man and a young woman, and this guy was doing his absolute best at convincing this girl to go home with him to be his partner for the night, and she was reluctant, and it went on for a while. He bought drinks and talked to her and tried to get her to do it. But the bottom line, the final words from her was, "No, I'm not going home with you. If I go home with you, the fire is going to burn down in the stove, and the dogs are going to eat my supper." So that was the end of that little thing. The next adventure is a bar again, and that's what's available. The men were lined up at the bar, kind of leaning over, shooting a breeze and drinking, and the girls were over at the end of the bar, kind of in a circle, chatting away. One lady, she went to the restroom twice, and she walked along behind the guys, and it seemed like she was trying to get one of them's attention, and that she gave him a real whack across the backside as she went by. After the next time she went to the restroom, she did exactly the same thing. He never acknowledged her whatsoever. Never acknowledged her. As I said, the roads were good. It was no problem, and we saw the scenery was exceptional. I can't explain it. It just was exceptional. We saw black bear, moose, bighorn sheep, and black bear. One of them had 2 or 3 cubs right in the middle of the road. So anyway, we day after day we worked our way toward Alaska and Anchorage, and we finally rolled into town about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And on our way to the hotel, we saw a big sign that said, "We buy cars." I pulled into the lot and I stepped out and I said, "Would you be interested in buying my car?" And he said, "Yeah, how about $400? And I said, "Oh man, it's worth a lot more than that. How about, I think it's worth $600. He said, "Okay, 5." And I said, "Sold." So the whole transaction took about 1 minute. After the deal was done, a young man that worked at the lot there was going to take us in our car down to the hotel. So he was driving us down there, and we got off on the sidewalk in front of the hotel, and we're standing there. And he leaves. He puts his foot to the floor, and the tires are squealing, and he's kind of wobbling down the street there. Oh man, it hurt my feelings, because that old car had been a part of my life and had been very faithful, and he was mistreating it pretty bad there. Well, we got a hotel room and slept overnight, and the next day a Northwest Airlines DC-10 took us back down to the lower 48. We could only smile. We realized that we had done an unusual adventure. So that's my story. Thank you very much.